To Kill a Mockingbird is an American film adapted from the novel of the same name by writer Harper Lee, directed by Robert Mulligan, released in 1962. To Kill a Mockingbird was not only very successful commercially, revenue 10 times the investment, but also received countless positive responses from critics and is always considered one of the best films of all time. In 1995, the film was entered into the National Film Registry, United States, and ranked 25th in the list of best films of all time. To Kill a Mockingbird is a novel by Harper Lee. This is a very popular novel, one of the best sellers in the world with more than 10 million copies. The novel was published in 1960 and won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1961. To Kill a Mockingbird tells the story of life in the American South during the Great Depression, as seen through the eyes of Scout Finch, as her father, a lawyer named Atticus, defends Tom Robinson, a wrongly accused black man. The novel explores themes of racial prejudice, justice, and the loss of innocence, and shows Scout and her brother Jem coming of age as they confront social injustice. Setting: the story takes place in the town of Macomb, Alabama in the 1930s, where racial prejudice is deeply ingrained. Main character, Scout Finch, is a smart, curious girl who is the narrator. Her father, Atticus, is an upright and courageous lawyer. Trial: Atticus takes on the defense of Tom Robinson, a black man wrongly accused of raping a white woman. Despite Atticus's overwhelming evidence of Tom's innocence, the all-white jury convicts him. Post-trial events: Tom Robinson is killed while trying to escape from jail. The white man attacks Jem and Scout on their way home, but is rescued and protected by Boo Radley, a mysterious neighbor. Bob Ewell's death: the attacker of Jem and Scout is Bob Ewell, the father of the accused white girl. He dies from a stab wound sustained during the attack, but the sheriff believes he stabbed himself in the back to protect Boo Radley. Themes and significance: racism and prejudice. The novel condemns the deep-seated racism and prejudice in the American South. Justice and integrity. The work emphasizes the need for justice and integrity even in the face of challenges and pressures from society. Loss of innocence. Scout and Jem mature as they come to understand more clearly the existence of evil and injustice in the world. Mockingbird imagery. The symbol of a mockingbird is a harmless, good creature, like Tom Robinson and Boo Radley, but is corrupted by society. Killing a mockingbird is considered a sin because it destroys innocence. To Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 1. When Jem was about 13, his arm was broken at the elbow. When it healed, Jem's fear of never being able to play football again was alleviated, and he thought less about his injury. His left arm was slightly shorter than his right. When he stood or walked, the back of his hand was perpendicular to his body, his thumb parallel to his thigh. He didn't care at all as long as he could pass and lob the ball. After enough years had passed for us to look back, we sometimes discussed the events that led up to the accident. I still thought it was the Ewells, but Jem, who was 4 years older than me, said it had started long before that. He said it started the summer Dill came to visit us, when Dill first gave us the idea of getting Bob Radley out of the house. I said if he wanted to get a general idea of it, it really started with Andrew Jackson. If General Jackson hadn't pushed the Creek Indians upriver, Simon Finch would never have paddled to Alabama, and where would we be if he hadn't? We were too old to settle an argument with fists, so we asked Atticus. He said we were both right. Being Southerners, some of our family were ashamed that we had no ancestors recorded on either side of the Battle of Hastings. We had only Simon Finch, a fur trapper from Cornwall, whose stinginess was outweighed by his piety. In England, Simon was indignant at the persecution of those who called themselves Methodists at the hands of their more liberal brethren, and since Simon also called himself a Methodist, he made his way across the Atlantic to Philadelphia, then to Jamaica, then to Mobile, and up to St. Stephen's. Always mindful of John Wesley's criticism of verbosity in business, Simon made his money practicing medicine, but he was unhappy in this business lest he be tempted to do what he knew was not for the glory of God, such as wearing gold and expensive clothes. So Simon, forgetting his teacher's maxim against owning slaves, bought 3 slaves, and with their help, established a farm on the banks of the Alabama River, about 40 miles upstream from St. Stephen's. Which was called Finch's Landing, and to make a living by growing cotton. The farm was entirely self-sufficient, modest compared with the large farms around it, but the landing produced everything necessary to sustain life except ice, flour, and clothing, which had to be bought from the merchant boats from Mobile. Simon watched with impotent fury the turmoil between North and South as it stripped his descendants of everything but their land. But the tradition of living off the land continued into the decades of the 20th century, when my father, Atticus Finch, went to Montgomery to study law, and his younger brother went to Boston to study medicine. His sister, Alexandra, was the Finch who remained at the landing. She married a quiet man who spent most of his time lying in a hammock by the river, wondering if his fishing lines were full. When he was admitted to the bar, my father returned to Macomb and began practicing. Macomb, 12 miles east of Finch's Landing, was the seat of Macomb County. Atticus's office at the courthouse contained little more them to accept the state's leniency in allowing them to plead guilty to second-degree murder and save their lives, but they were Haverfords, a name synonymous in Macomb County with idiots. The Haverfords had murdered Macomb's best blacksmith in a misunderstanding stemming from the alleged wrongful seizure of a horse, were unwise to do it in front of 3 witnesses, and insisting on the son of a bitch if he meant it defense was good enough for anyone. They insisted they were not guilty of first-degree murder, so Atticus could do nothing for his clients except be present at their departure, a trial that was probably the beginning of his father's distaste for criminal law. During his first 5 years in Macomb, Atticus practiced economy more than anything else, and for many years afterward, he invested his earnings in his brother's education. John Hale Finch was 10 years younger than father, and had chosen to study medicine at a time when cotton farming was no longer profitable. But after helping Uncle Jack get started, Atticus had a considerable income from the law. He liked Macomb. He was born and bred in Macomb County. He knew the people and they knew him. And because of Simon Finch's business, Atticus was related by blood or marriage to most of the families in the town. Macomb is an old town, but it was a sad old town when I first knew it. In the rainy season, the streets turned red with mud. Grass grew on the sidewalks. The courthouse drooped in the square. It was hotter then, somehow. A black dog was miserable on a summer day. Bony mules hitched to wagons swatted flies in the hot shade of the oaks on the square. By 9 o'clock, the men's stiff collars drooped. The women bathed before noon, then after their 3 o'clock naps, and by nightfall, they were like soft butter cakes covered with sweat and sweet talcum powder. People moved slowly then. They wandered across the square, shuffled in and out of the surrounding stores, took their time about everything. The 24 hours of the day seemed longer. There was no hurry, for there was nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with, nothing to see outside the boundaries of Macomb County. But those were the days of vague optimism for some, until recently. Macomb County had been told it had nothing to fear but fear itself. We lived on the main street of town, Atticus, Jem, and me, and Calpurnia, our cook. Jem and I found our father pleasant. He played with us, read with us, and treated us with polite detachment. Calpurnia was different. She was all angles and bones. She was nearsighted. She was cross-eyed. Her hands were as wide as bedposts and twice as hard. She always chased me from the kitchen, asked me why I couldn't behave like Jem, even though she knew he was older, and called me home when I didn't want to. Our battles were epic and lopsided. Calpurnia always won, mainly because Atticus always took her side. She had been with us since Jem was born, and for as long as I can remember, I've felt her domineering presence. Our mother died when 12835, 5 Niusani. I was 2, so I never missed her. She was a gram from Montgomery. Atticus met her when he was first elected to the state legislature. He was middle-aged then, years younger. Jem was the product of their first year of marriage. I was born 4 years later, and 2 years later, my mother died of a heart attack. They said it ran in her family. I don't remember her. He remembered her well, and sometimes in the middle of a game he'd sigh for a long time, then go off to play by himself behind the garage. When he was like that, I knew better than to bother him. When I was almost 6 and Jem was almost 10, our summer vacation boundaries, within earshot of Calpurnia, were Mrs. Henry Lafayette Dubos's house, 2 doors north of us, and the Radley place, 3 doors south. We never meant to break those boundaries. The Radley place was inhabited by an alien entity whose mere description kept us well behaved for days on end, and Mrs. Dubose was boring to death. That was the summer Dill came to us. Early one morning, as we were starting our backyard games, Jem and I heard something next door, in Miss Rachel Haverford's cabbage patch. We went to the wire fence to see if there was a puppy Miss Rachel's rat terrier was expecting, and instead, we found a baby looking at us. Sitting there, it wasn't much taller than the cabbages. We watched it until it said, "Hello." "Hello," Jem said cheerfully. "I'm Charles Baker Harris," he said. "I can read." "So?" I said. "I thought you'd want to know if I could read. If you have anything you'd like me to read, I'll read it to you." "How old are you?" Jem asked. 4.5? Soon to be 7. Chapter 2. Dill left us early in September to return to Meridian. We saw him off on the 5 o'clock bus, and I was miserable without him until I remembered that school was a week away. I never looked forward to anything more in my life. Many winter hours I spent in the treehouse, looking over the schoolyard, spying on the children with the double-lens telescope Jem had given me, studying their games, following Jem's red coat through the snaking groups of blind man's buff, secretly sharing their misfortunes and their small victories. I longed to join them. Jem condescended to walk me to school the first day, a task usually done by parents, but Atticus said Jem would like to show me where my room was. I think he must have gotten some money for it, because, as we trotted around the corner past the Radley place, I heard Jem's pockets jingling unusually. When we slowed at the edge of the school, Jem carefully explained that I was not to bother him during school hours. I was not to approach him to ask him to act out a scene from Tarzan and the Ant-Men, embarrass him by mentioning his private life, or tag along at recess and lunch. I was to play with my first graders, and he with the 5th. In short, I was to leave him alone. "You mean we don't play together anymore?" I asked. "We still play together at home," he said. "But you know, school's different." Sure enough, before the first morning was over, Miss Caroline Fisher, our teacher, pulled me to the front of the room and tapped my hand with a ruler, then made me stand in a corner until noon. Miss Caroline couldn't have been more than 21. She had light brown hair, rosy cheeks, and crimson nail polish. She also wore high heels and a red and white striped dress. She looked and smelled like a peppermint drop. She boarded across the street from us in Miss Maudie Atkinson's upstairs room, and when Miss Maudie introduced me to her, Jem was puzzled for days. Miss Caroline printed her name on the blackboard and said, "This means, I am Miss Caroline Fisher. I am from North Alabama, Winston County." The class murmured anxiously, wondering if she would prove herself to be one of the peculiarities of that region. When Alabama seceded from the Union on January 11, 1861, Winston County seceded from Alabama, and every child in Macomb County knew about it. North Alabama was still full of liquor corporations, big mules, steel companies, Republicans, professors, and other people of unknown origin. Miss Caroline began the day by reading us a story about cats. The cats had long conversations with each other, wore attractive little clothes, and lived in a warm house under a stove. By the time Mrs. Cat called the drugstore to order chocolate malted mice, the whole class was squirming like a barrel of wormwood. Miss Caroline seemed unaware that the first graders, dressed in flour sack skirts and ragged cotton shirts, most of whom had chopped cotton plants and fed pigs since they could walk, were immune to imaginative literature. Miss Caroline finished the story and asked, Well, was it any good? Then she went to the blackboard and wrote the alphabet in big square letters, turned to the class and asked, "Does anyone know these?" Everyone did. Most first graders had failed the year before. I suppose she chose me because she knew my name. When I read the alphabet, a faint frown appeared between her eyebrows, and after I had read aloud most of my first reader and the stock market quotations from the mobile register, she discovered that I knew how to read and looked at me with even greater disapproval. Miss Caroline told me to tell my father not to teach me anymore. It would interfere with my studies. "Teach me?" I said in surprise. "My father doesn't teach me anything, Miss Caroline. Atticus doesn't have time to teach me anything," I added. Whereupon Miss Caroline smiled and shook her head. "Oh, my father is very tired in the evenings and just sits in the living room reading." "If he doesn't teach you, who does?" Miss Caroline asked kindly. "Someone has taught you. You weren't born with the ability to read the mobile register." "Jem says I can read. He read in a book where my last name was Bullfinch instead of Finch. Jem says my name is really Jean Louise Bullfinch, that I was switched at birth, and that I'm really a—" It was obvious Miss Caroline thought I was lying. "Don't let imaginations get the best of us, dear," she said. "Now go and tell your father not to teach you anymore. It's best to start with a fresh mind. Tell him I'll take care of it now and try to undo the damage." "Ma'am?" "Your father doesn't know how to teach. You can sit down." I mumbled that I was sorry and went to think about my crime. I hadn't meant to learn to read, but somehow I'd gotten into it. I learned to read the daily papers furtively. During the long hours in church. Was that what I learned then? I can't remember a time when I couldn't read hymns. Now that I have to think about it, reading was something that came naturally to me, like learning to fasten the crotch of my overalls without looking around, or tying 2 bows from a tangle of shoelaces. I can't remember when the lines above Atticus's moving fingers separated into separate words, but I've stared at them all evening in my memory while I listened to the news of the day. Bills passed into law, Lorenzo Dow's diary, everything Atticus happened to be reading when I crawled into his lap each night. Until I was afraid of losing it, I never loved reading. One doesn't love breathing. I knew I was bothering Miss Caroline, so I was left alone and looked out the window until recess, when Jem separated me from the first graders in the schoolyard. Jem asked me how I was doing. I told him. If I hadn't had to stay, I would have gone home. "Jem, that awful lady says Atticus taught me to read and he had to stop it." "Don't worry, Scout," Jem assured me. "My teacher says Miss Caroline's introducing a new method of teaching. She learns it in college. All the classes will be using it soon. You don't have to learn much from books that way. It's like if you want to know about cows, you have to milk." "See? I understand, Jem, but I don't want to learn about cows. Sure. You have to know about cows. They're a big part of life in Macomb County." It took all I had to do to stop the urge to ask Jem if he was crazy. "I was just trying to tell you about the new way they're teaching first grade, you stubborn. It's called the Dewey Decimal System." Having never doubted Jem's official pronouncements, I saw no reason to ask now. The Dewey Decimal System, in part, consisted of Miss Caroline waving slates in front of us with words like the, cat, rat, man, and you written on them. She didn't seem to expect any comment from us, and the class took in these impressive revelations in silence. I was bored, so I started writing to Dill. Miss Caroline caught me writing and told me to tell my father to stop teaching me. "Besides," she said, "we don't write in first grade. We just work on loose-leaf letters. You won't learn to write until 3rd. Calpurnia was responsible for this. It kept me from driving her crazy on rainy days, I guess. She gave me a writing assignment of scribbling the alphabet on the top of a chalkboard, then copying a chapter of the Bible underneath. If I copied it satisfactorily in her handwriting, I was rewarded with a buttered and sugar sandwich. There was no sentimentality in Calpurnia's teaching. I rarely pleased her, and she rarely rewarded me. "Hands up! Who's going home for lunch?" Miss Caroline said, cutting through my new irritation with Calpurnia. Their hands, and she looked around at us. Who's bringing lunches to the table? Buckets of molasses suddenly appeared, and the ceiling glinted with metallic light. Miss Caroline walked up and down the rows of desks, peering and fingering the lunchboxes, nodding if the contents pleased her, frowning slightly at others. She stopped at Walter Cunningham's desk. "Where's your lunch?" she asked. Walter Cunningham's face told everyone in the first grade that he had hookworms. The fact that he wasn't wearing shoes told us how he got them. People get hookworms from walking barefoot in stables and hog wallows. If Walter had shoes, he would wear them on the first day of school and then throw them away until midwinter. He wore a clean shirt and a well-tailored overalls. "Did you forget your lunch this morning?" Miss Caroline asked. Walter looked straight ahead. I saw one muscle in his bony jaw twitch. "Did you forget your lunch?" Miss Caroline asked. His jaw twitched again. "Yes, ma'am," he finally mumbled. Miss Caroline went to her desk and opened her purse. "Here's a quarter," she said to Walter. "Go downtown and eat it today. I'll pay you back tomorrow." Walter shook his head. "No, thank you," he drawled. Miss Caroline's voice was starting to lose its patience. "Here, Walter, take this." Walter shook his head again. When Walter shook his head a third time, someone whispered, "Go ahead and tell her, Scout." I turned around and saw most of the town and the entire bus group looking at me. Miss Caroline had spoken to me twice, and they looked at me with the naive confidence that familiarity breeds understanding. I stood up properly in Walter's name. Miss Caroline?" "What is it, Jean-Louise?" "Miss Caroline, she's a Cunningham." I sat down. "What do you mean, Jean-Louise? I thought I had made it all right." So it was clear enough. It was clear enough to all of us. Walter Cunningham was sitting there with his head down. He hadn't forgotten his lunch. He hadn't had any. He hadn't had any today, nor tomorrow, nor the day after. He'd probably never seen 3/4 at once in his life. I tried again. "Walter's a Cunningham, Miss Caroline." "I'm sorry you don't understand, Jean-Louise." "Yes, ma'am, you'll get to know everybody in town in a little while. The Cunninghams never took anything they couldn't pay back. No church subscriptions, no loose change. They never took anything from anybody. They lived on what they had. They didn't have much, but they managed. My special knowledge of the Cunninghams, that is, a branch of them, came from the events of the previous year. Father Walter was one of Atticus's clients. One night, after a bad conversation in our living room about his bequest, before Mr. Cunningham left, he said, "Mr. Finch, I don't know when I'm going to pay you." "Don't worry about it, Walter," Atticus said. When I asked Jem what bequest was, and Jem described it as having your tail stuck in a crack, I asked Atticus if Mr. Cunningham would pay us. "Not in money," Atticus said, "but they will before the end of the year. Keep an eye out." We did. One morning, Jem and I found a pile of firewood in the backyard. Later, a sack of hickory nuts was on the back steps. Christmas was a box of vines and holly for decorations. That spring, we found a sack full of turnip greens, and Atticus said Mr. Cunningham was paying him too much. "Why did he pay you like that?" I asked. "Because it was the only way he could pay you. He didn't have any money." "Are we poor, Atticus?" Atticus nodded. "We are." Jem's nose wrinkled. "Are we as poor as the Cunninghams?" "Not exactly. The Cunninghams were country folk, farmers, and the stock crash hit them hardest." Atticus said the professional people were poor because the farmers were poor. Since Macomb County was an agricultural county, nickels and dimes were hard to come by for doctors, dentists, and lawyers. The restrictions were only part of Mr. Cunningham's worries. The fields that were not restricted were mortgaged almost completely, and the little cash he had was going to interest payments. If he kept his mouth shut, Mr. Cunningham could get a job with the WPA. But his land would perish if he left it, and he was willing to starve to keep it and vote as he pleased. Atticus said Mr. Cunningham was one of those stubborn people who don't like to change. Since the Cunninghams didn't have money to pay a lawyer, they paid us with what they had. "Did you know," Atticus said, "that Dr. Reynolds works the custody same way? He charges a bushel of potatoes for delivering a baby with some people. Scout, if you pay attention, I'll tell you what a levy is. Jem's definition is pretty accurate sometimes." If I could have explained all this to Miss Caroline, I might have saved myself some trouble and Miss Caroline some embarrassment, but it was beyond me to explain things as clearly as Atticus. So I said, "You're embarrassing him, Miss Caroline. Walter hasn't got a quarter at home to pay you, and you can't use any wood." Miss Caroline stood still, then she grabbed me by the collar and dragged me to her desk. "Jean-Louise, I've had enough of you this morning," she said. "You're starting off on the wrong foot in everything. Hold out your hand." I thought she was going to spit on it, which is the only reason people in Maycomb hold out their hands. It's the old-fashioned way of sealing a verbal contract. Wondering what we'd agreed upon, I turned to the class for an answer, but the class looked back at me in bewilderment. Miss Caroline picked up the ruler, gave it 6 quick strokes, and told me to stand in the corner. There was a burst of laughter when the class finally realized that Miss Caroline had whipped me. When Miss Caroline threatened the class with the same, the first grade laughed again, only becoming serious when Miss Blount's shadow fell over them. Miss Blount, a native Maycomb native who had until then been ignorant of the mysteries of the decimal system, appeared at the door, hands on hips, and announced, "If I hear another sound from this room, I'll burn everyone in here. Miss Caroline, the 6th grade can't concentrate on the pyramid for all this noise." I only had to stand in the corner for a moment. Saved by the bell, Miss Caroline watched the class file out for lunch. When she left the room after everyone else, I saw her slump in her chair and bury her head in her arms. If she had been nice to me, I would have felt sorry for her. She was quite pretty. Chapter 3. Capturing Walter Cunningham in. More favorable than the first. They were, in fact, an endless exploration that slowly evolved into a lesson, in which miles of construction paper and crayons were paid for by the state of Alabama in its well-meaning but futile efforts to teach me about group dynamics. What Jem called the Dewey Decimal System was school-wide by the end of my first year, so I had no opportunity to compare it with other teaching methods. I could only look around. Atticus and my uncle, who was homeschooled, knew everything. At least, what one didn't know, the other did. Moreover, I couldn't help but notice that my father had served for years in the state legislature, elected unopposed each time, unaffected by the modifications my teachers thought essential to the development of good citizenship. Jem, educated on the half-decimal, half-ignorance cap basis, seemed to function well alone or in a group. But Jem was a bad example. No tutoring system ever devised could keep him from burying his nose in books. As for me, I knew nothing except what I gleaned from Time magazine and read everything I could get my hands on at home. But as I moved languidly through the humdrum routine of the Maycomb County school system, I couldn't help but feel like I was being cheated out of something. Apart from what I didn't know, I didn't believe that 12 years of relentless boredom was what the state wanted for me. All year long, leaving school 30 minutes before Jem, and having him stay until 3, I raced past the Radley place, not stopping until I reached the safety of my porch. One afternoon, as I was running by, something caught my eye, and it struck me in a way that made me take a deep breath, look around, and turn back. 2 lush oaks stood at the edge of the Radley lot. Their roots spread out to the edge of the road, making it uneven. Something about one of the oaks caught my eye. Some silver notes lay in a hollow just above my eye level, winking at me in the afternoon sunlight. I tiptoed, looked around again, reached into the hollow, and pulled out 2 pieces of chewing gum without the outer wrapper. My first impulse was to put them in my mouth immediately, but I remembered where I was. I ran home, and on the porch, I examined my find. The candy looked new. I sniffed it and found it smelled delicious. I licked it and waited a moment. Seeing I wasn't dead, I stuffed it into my mouth. Wrigley's Double Mint. When Jem came home, he asked me where I got the candy. I told him I found it. "Don't eat things you find, Scout." "This wasn't on the ground. It was in a tree," Jem growled. "Really, it was in that tree over there, the one on the way home from school." "Spit it out." I spat it out. The taste was off anyway. I chewed it all afternoon and I didn't die, not even get sick. Jem stamped his foot. "Don't you know you're not even supposed to touch those trees? You'll die if you do." "I touched that house." That's different. Go rinse your mouth. Right now, you hear? No, it'll ruin your breath. Or I'll tell Calpurnia. To avoid trouble with Calpurnia, I did as Jem said. For some reason, my first year of school had made a big difference in our relationship. Calpurnia's
For some reason, my first year of school had made a big difference in our relationship. Calpurnia's oppression, unfairness, and meddling had gradually faded into gentle nagging. It took a lot of effort on my part, sometimes, not to irritate her. Summer was coming, Jem and I were looking forward to it. Summer was our best season, sleeping on cots on the screened back porch, or trying to sleep in the tree house. It was good things to eat, it was 1,000 colors in the hot, dry land, but above all, it was Dill. School let us out early on the last day of school and Jem and I walked home together. Dill should be here tomorrow, I said. Maybe the day after, Jem said. It's more than a day from Mississippi. When we reached the oak tree at the Radley place, I pointed for the 100th time to the hollow where I had found the chewing gum, trying to convince Jem that I had picked it up, and found myself pointing to another piece of tin foil. I see it, Scout. I see it. Jem looked around, reached up, and carefully pocketed a tiny shiny package. We ran home, and on the porch we looked at the little box made of chewing gum foil. It was the kind of box that wedding rings come in, purple velvet with a little clasp. Jem flipped the clasp open. Inside were 2 polished, scrubbed pennies, one on top of the other. Jem examined them carefully. Indian head, he said. 1906 and Scout, one is 1900. This is a real antique. 1900, I repeated. That means, hush, I'm thinking. Jem, do you think that's somebody's hiding place? Not many people go by there except us, unless it's some grown-up's hiding place. Grown ups don't make hiding places. Do you think we should keep them, Jem? I don't know what we can do, Scout. Who should we give them back to? I know damn well nobody goes by there. Cecil takes the side road and goes around town to get home. Cecil Jacobs, who lived at the end of our street, next to the post office, walked a mile-plus round trip to school every day to avoid the Radley place and Mrs. Henry Lafayette Dubos's house. Mrs. Dubose lived 2 doors down from us. Neighborhood opinion was that Mrs. Dubose was the meanest old woman in the world. Jem didn't usually pass her house without Atticus. So what do you think we should do, Jem? The finder got to keep them unless someone else could prove ownership. Picking a camellia now and then, milking some hot milk from Miss Maudie Atkinson's cow on a summer day, stealing someone's grapes was part of our moral culture, but money was different. Look, said Jem. Let's keep them till school starts, then go around and ask who they belong to. Maybe they belong to the bus kid. He was so happy to get the day off that he forgot about them. These things must belong to someone, I know. See how they're polished? They're saved from use. Yeah, but why would anyone want to save chewing gum like that? You know it doesn't last long. I don't know, Scout. But these things are important to someone. How important, Jem? Indian head pennies. They come from the Indians. They have a mighty magic about them, they bring you good luck. Not like fried chicken when you're not looking for it, but things like long life and good health, and passing 6-week tests. These things really mean something to somebody. I'll keep them in my trunk. Before Jem went to his room, he took a long look at the Radley house. He seemed to be thinking again. 2 days later Dill arrived in a blaze of glory. He'd ridden the train from Meridian to Macomb Junction, an honorary title. Macomb Junction was in Abbott County, by himself, where he'd been met by Miss Rachel in Macomb's taxi. He'd eaten in the train car, he'd seen the twins get off together in St. Louis and stuck to his story despite threats. He had discarded the hateful blue shorts that buttoned to his shirt and was wearing real shorts with a belt. He seemed bigger, not taller, and said he had met his father. Dill's father was taller than ours, had a black, pointed, beard, and was president of the L&N Railroad. I helped the engineer for a while, Dill said, yawning. You're making a mess of things, Dill. Hold on, Jem said. What are we playing today? Tom, Sam, and Dick, Dill said. Let's go out in the front yard. Dill wanted to play Rover Boys because there were 3 decent parts in the story. He was obviously tired of playing oddballs for us. I'm tired of those, I said. I was tired of playing Tom Rover, who suddenly loses his memory in the middle of a picture show and disappears from the script until the end, when he's found in Alaska. Make up a play for us, Jem, I said. I'm so bored with making comics. It was only our first days of freedom and we were already bored. I wondered what this summer would bring. Something. We wandered out into the front yard, where Dill stood looking down the street at the bleak facade of the Radley building. I smell death, he said. Really, I mean it, he said, when I told him to shut up. You mean you can smell when someone's about to die? No, I mean I can smell someone and tell if they're about to die. An old woman taught me how. Dill leaned forward and sniffed me. Jeans Louis Finch, you're going to die in 3 days. Dill, if you don't stop I'll kick your ass. I mean it, shut up, Jem growled, you act like you believe in hot steams. And you act like you don't, I snapped. What's a hot steam? Dill asked. Haven't you ever been walking down a lonely road at night and come across a hot spot? Jem asked Dill. A hot steam's a man who can't go to heaven, who wanders around lonely roads, and if you walk through one, you'll become one when you die, and you'll wander around all night sucking people's breath. How do you avoid walking through one? No way, Jem said. It's lying across the road sometimes, but if you do, say, angel of light, dead and alive, get off this road, don't suck my breath, that'll keep it from wrapping around you. Don't believe a word he says, Dill, I interjected. Calpurnia says it's a Negro tale. Jem looked at me grimly. All right, are we going to do something? Let's roll in the tires, I suggested. Jem sighed. You know I'm too big. I'll push. I ran to the backyard and pulled an old tire from under the deck. I rolled it out to the front yard. Me first, I said. Dill said he had to go first, since he was new. Jem arbitrated, giving me the go-ahead and Dill the longer roll, and I curled up inside the tire. It wasn't until it happened that I realized Jem was mad at me for arguing with him about hot steam, and he was waiting for a chance to get back at me. He did, by pushing the tire with all his might along the curb. Earth, sky, and houses were all mixed together, my ears were ringing, I was suffocating. I couldn't get my hands out to stop them, they were stuck between my chest and knees. All I could do was hope that Jem would outrun the tire and me, or that a bump in the curb would stop me. I heard him behind me, chasing and yelling. The tire bounced on the gravel, crossed the street, hit a guardrail, and flipped me like a button onto the sidewalk. Dizzy and nauseous, I lay on the cement and shook my head, clapping my ears to clear the ringing, then heard Jem's voice, Scout, get out of there. I lifted my head and saw the Radley steps right in front of me. I froze. Come on, Scout, don't just lie there. Jem yelled. Get up, can you? I stood, shaking as I tried to come back to myself. Get the tire. Jem yelled. Take it. Don't you understand anything? When I recovered, I ran toward them as fast as my shaking legs could carry me. Why didn't you take it? Jem yelled. Why didn't you go in and get it? I yelled back. Jem said nothing. Go on, it's not far from the gate. You even touched that house, remember? Jem looked at me scowling, but couldn't refuse. He ran down the sidewalk, stepped in the puddle by the gate, broke in, and retrieved the tire. See? Jem scowled triumphantly. It's nothing. I'm telling the truth. Scout, sometimes you act like a girl, it's embarrassing. There was more to it than he knew, but I decided not to tell him. Calpurnia appeared at the front door and yelled, Lemonade time. Get in before the heat burns you alive. Mid-morning lemonade was a summer ritual, and Calpurnia set out a pitcher and 3 glasses on the porch, then went about her business. Being out of Jem's good graces didn't bother me much. The water would restore his sense of humor. Jem finished his second glass and pounded his chest. I know what we're going to play, he announced. Something new, something different. What? Dill asked. Boo Radley. Jem's head was so clear sometimes, he'd thought of it to make me understand that he wasn't afraid of the Radley place in any way, to contrast his own fearless heroism with my cowardice. Boo Radley? What do you mean? Dill asked. Jem said, Scout, you can play Mrs. Radley. I declare if I like. I don't think. What's all this nonsense? Dill asked, still scared. He can come out at night when we're all asleep. I said. Jem whistled, Scout, how does he know what we're doing? Besides, I don't think he's still there. He's been dead for years, and they stuffed him up the chimney. Dill said, Jem, you and I can play, and Scout can watch if she's scared. I was absolutely certain that Boo Radley was still in that house, but I couldn't prove it, and I felt it best to keep my mouth shut or I'd be accused of believing in hot steams, a phenomenon I wasn't worried about during the day. Jem assigned us roles. I was Mrs. Radley, and all I had to do was go out and sweep the porch. Dill was old Mr. Radley. He paced up and down the sidewalk and coughed when Jem talked to him. Jem, of course, was Bob. He ducked under the front steps and occasionally yelled or howled. As the summer progressed, so did our joke. We polished and perfected it, adding dialogue and plot until we had a little play that we changed every day. Dill was a villain's villain. He could get into any part assigned to him, and appear tall if height was part of the mischief required. He only acted at his worst. It was creepy. I reluctantly played the various women in the play. I never thought it was as much fun as playing Tarzan, and that summer I played the part with vague trepidation despite Jem's assurances that Boo Radley was dead and nothing could touch me with him and Calpurnia by day and Atticus by night. Jem was a natural hero. It was a bleak little play, woven from bits and pieces of neighborhood gossip. Mrs. Radley was quite pretty until she married Mr. Radley and lost all her money. She also lost most of her teeth, her hair, and her right index finger. Dill's contribution, which Bob bit off one night when he couldn't find a cat or a squirrel to eat. She sat in the living room and cried all the time, while Bob gradually took everything in the house away. The three of us were the kids who got into trouble. I was the probate judge. For a change, Dill led Jem away and sat him down on the steps, poking him with a broom. Jem returned as needed in the guises of the sheriff, townspeople of various kinds, and Miss Stephanie Crawford, who had more to say about the Radleys than anyone in Maycomb. When it was time to play Bob's big scene, Jem would sneak into the house, steal the scissors from the sewing machine drawer while Calpurnia was away, then sit on the swing cutting out newspapers. Dill would pass by, cough at Jem, and Jem would pretend to throw himself into Dill's thigh. From where I stood it looked very real. When Mr. Nathan Radley passed us as usual on his way to town, we would stand still until he was out of sight, then wonder what he would do to us if he suspected something. Our activities paused when any of the neighbors appeared, and once I saw Miss Maudie Atkinson looking at us from across the street, her hedge clippers hovering in the air. One day, engrossed in Chapter XXV, Part 2 of One Man's Family, we saw Atticus standing on the sidewalk watching us, patting a rolled-up magazine against his knee. The sun said it was 12 o'clock noon. "What are you playing at?" he asked. "Nothing," Jem said. Jem's evasive answer told me our game was a secret, so I kept quiet. "What are you doing with those scissors? Why are you tearing up that newspaper? If it was today's paper I'd give you a spanking." "Nothing." "What do you mean nothing?" Atticus asked. "Nothing, sir." "Give me the scissors," Atticus said. "It's not something you're supposed to play with. Doesn't this have something to do with the Radleys?" "No, sir," Jem said, blushing. "I hope not," he said curtly, and went into the house. Jem shut up. Father just came into the living room, where he can hear us. Out in the safety of the yard, Dill asked Jem if we could play again. "I don't know. Atticus didn't say we couldn't, Jem," I said. "I think Atticus knows." "He doesn't know. If he did, he'd say he knew." I wasn't sure, but Jem told me I was a girl, that girls always imagined things, that's why people hated them so, and if I kept acting like a girl I could go off and find someone else to play with. "All right, keep your opinions to yourself," I said. "You'll see." Atticus's appearance was the second reason I wanted to quit the game. The first happened the day I rolled into the Radley yard. Through the dizziness, the nausea, and Jem's howling, I heard another sound, so low I couldn't have heard it on the sidewalk. Someone in the house was laughing. Chapter 5. My nagging finally got the better of Jem, as I had predicted, and I was relieved when we stopped playing the game for a while. Still, he figured Atticus hadn't stopped us from playing, so we could, and if Atticus had said we couldn't, Jem had figured out some way around it. He'd simply change the names of the characters and then we couldn't be accused of playing anything. Dill agreed enthusiastically to this plan of action. Dill was becoming something of an experiment anyway, hanging around Jem. He'd asked me to marry him earlier in the summer, then promptly forgotten about it. It clung to me, saw me as its property, and called me its son. The only love he ever loved, then he left me. I beat him twice to no avail, and he became even friendlier to Jem. The two of us spent days together in the treehouse plotting and planning, calling me only when they needed a third. I stayed out of their silly schemes for a while, and, with the pain of being called a girl, I spent most of the remaining twilights of that summer sitting with Miss Maudie Atkinson on her front porch. Jem and I were free to run around in Miss Maudie's yard if we stayed away from her rhododendrons, but our relationship with her was undefined. Until Dill and Jem cut me out of their plans, she was the only other female in the neighborhood, but a relatively tame one. Our tacit agreement with Miss Maudie was that we could play on her lawn, eat her grapes if we didn't jump the arbor, or wander into the large back lot, terms so generous we seldom spoke to her, so we were careful to maintain a delicate balance in our relationship. But Dill and Jem's behavior pushed me closer to her. Miss Maudie hated her house, time spent inside was time wasted. She was a widow, a woman of often changing appearances, who tended the flower beds in an old straw hat and men's overalls, but after her 5 o'clock bath she would appear at the gate and rule the street in commanding beauty. She loved everything that grew on God's earth, even the weeds. With one exception. If she found a blade of weed in her yard, it was like a second battle of Marna. She swooped down on the bundle with a tin basin and set it on fire from below with a poison she said was so powerful it would kill us all if we didn't stay away. "Why don't you just pull it up?" I asked, after witnessing a relentless campaign against a blade of weed less than an inch high. "Pull it up, child, pull it up." She picked up the frail shoot and pressed her thumb against its tiny stem. Tiny seeds fell out. "Why, one blade of weed can ruin a yard. Look. When fall comes this dries up and the wind blows it all over Macomb County." Miss Maudie's face likened the incident to a plague in the Old Testament. Her speech was decisive for a Macomb native. She called us by both our first and last names. And when she smiled, she revealed 2 tiny gold bands clamped to her upper teeth. As I admired them, hoping I would eventually get some, she said, "Look." With a flick of her tongue she brought out her false bridge, a gesture of sincerity that cemented our friendship. Miss Maudie's kindness extended to Jem and Dill whenever they paused in their chases. We benefited from a talent that Miss Maudie had hitherto kept hidden from us. She made the best pies in the country. When she had our confidence, she baked 1 large pie and 3 small ones at a time, and she would call across the street, "Jem Finch, Scout Finch, Charles Baker Harris, come here." Our promptness was always rewarded. In the summer, the sunsets were long and peaceful. Many a time Miss Maudie and I would sit silently on her porch, watching the sky change from gold to pink as the sun set, watching the swallows fly low over the neighborhood and disappear behind the schoolhouse. "Miss Maudie," I said one evening, "do you think Boo Radley is alive?" "His name is Arthur and he is alive," she said. She was rocking in her big oak chair. "Do you smell my mimosa? It's like angel breath tonight." "Yes, I do." "How do you know?" "Know what, child?" "That be Mr. Arthur is alive." A terrible question. But I think it's a terrible subject. I know he's alive, Jean Louise, because I didn't see him taken out. Maybe he's dead and they stuffed him up the chimney. Where did you get that idea? Jem says he thinks they did. Oh, my. He's getting more like Jack Finch. Miss Maudie had known Uncle Jack Finch, Atticus's younger brother, since they were children. Nearly the same age, they'd grown up together in Finch's Landing. Miss Maudie was the daughter of a neighboring landowner, Dr. Frank Buford. Dr. Buford's profession was medicine and his obsession was anything that grew in the ground, so he remained poor. Uncle Jack Finch confined his digging passion to his window boxes in Nashville and remained wealthy. We saw Uncle Jack every Christmas, and every Christmas he'd holler across the street and ask Miss Maudie to come and marry him. Miss Maudie would holler back, shout a little louder, "Jack Finch, and they'll hear you at the post office, I didn't hear you." Jem and I thought this was a strange way to ask a woman to marry him, but Uncle Jack was a little strange then. He said he was making Miss Maudie angry, that he had been trying unsuccessfully for 40 years, that he was the last one on earth Miss Maudie thought of when she wanted to marry, but was the first person she thought of to tease, and her best defense was a strong insult. All this we knew. "Arthur Radley just stays in the house, that's all," Miss Maudie said. "Would you stay in the house if you didn't want to go out?" "Yes, but you want to go out. Why doesn't he?" Miss Maudie narrowed her eyes. "I know as well as you. You never heard why. Nobody ever told you why." Miss Maudie put her bridge back on. "You know old man Radley is a foot-washing Baptist like you, are you? Your shell isn't that tough, child. You're just a Baptist. Don't all you people believe in foot-washing?" "Yes. At home, in the bathtub. But we can't take communion with people like you." Miss Maudie evidently thought it easier to define primitive Baptists 26 than closed churches, for she said, "Foot-washing Baptists believe that anything that brings joy is a sin. Did you know some of them came out of the woods and passed by here one Saturday and told me you and your flowers were going to hell? Your flowers were going too." "Yes, honey. They burned with you. They thought you spent too much time outdoors and not enough time indoors reading your Bible." My faith in the Gospels in the pulpit diminished at the sight of Miss Maudie burning forever in various Protestant hells. She had a sharp tongue, to be sure, and she didn't go around the neighborhood doing good, as Miss Stephanie Crawford did. But while no one with a shred of sense trusted Miss Stephanie, Jem and I trusted Miss Maudie completely. She never told on us, never played cat and mouse with us. She was completely unconcerned with our privacy. She was our friend. How such a knowing creature could live in perpetual danger of torture is beyond comprehension. "That's not true, Miss Maudie. You're the most wonderful woman I know." Miss Maudie smiled broadly. "Thank you, dear. The thing is, foot washers think women are somehow sinful by definition. They take the Bible quite literally, you know. Is that why Mr. Arthur stays in the house, to keep away from women?" "I don't know. You don't understand at all. Like if Mr. Arthur was hungry for heaven he'd at least come out the gate. Atticus says God loves man as we love ourselves." Miss Maudie stopped rocking, and her voice hardened. "You're too young to understand that," she said, "but sometimes a Bible in someone's hand is worse than a bottle of brandy in the hand of your father." I was shocked. "Atticus doesn't drink," I said. "He never had a drop in his life." "No, he did. He said he had a little once and didn't like it." Miss Maudie laughed. "I'm not talking about your father," she said. "I mean, if Atticus Finch drank himself to a drunken stupor he wouldn't be as unpleasant as some people at their best. There are some kinds of people they're so busy worrying about the next world that they don't know how to live in this one, and you can look down the street and see the results. Do you think it's true, all that stuff they say about Mr. Arthur?" "What stuff?" I told her. "3/4 colored people and 1/4 Stephanie Crawford," Miss Maudie said firmly. "Stephanie Crawford told me she woke up one night and saw him looking at her through the window." I said, "What did you do, Stephanie? Move over and make room for him." That shut her up for a while. I believe it. Miss Maudie's tone would have shut anyone up. "No, dear," she said, "it was a sad house. I remember Arthur Radley when he was a little boy. He always talked to me so sweetly, no matter what anyone said. He talked as sweetly as he knew how. Do you think he's crazy?" Miss Maudie shook her head. "If he wasn't crazy, he must be crazy now. We never really know what happens to people. What goes on in closed houses, what secrets. Atticus never does anything to Jem and you in the house that he doesn't do in the yard," I said, feeling it was my duty to defend my father. "Good girl," I was untangling a thread, "not even thinking about your father, but now I say this, Atticus Finch is just the same in the house as he is in public. Would you like to take some pies home? I was delighted. The next morning when I woke up I found Dill and Jem in the backyard deep in conversation. When I joined them, as usual they told me to go away and play. No. This yard ain't yours alone, Jem Finch. You have a right to play in here, just like you. Dill and Jem conferred privately for a moment, then turned to me. If you stay here, you'll have to do as we say, Dill warned. Gee, I said, who's suddenly so high and mighty? If you don't do as we say, we won't tell you anything, Dill continued. You act like you've grown a foot taller overnight. All right, what is it? Jem said calmly. We'll send a letter to Boo Radley. How? I fought down the automatic terror that rose up inside me. It didn't matter what Miss Maudie said, she was old and safe on her porch. We were different. Jem just put the letter on the end of a fishing pole and stuck it through the shutters. If anyone came, Dill would ring the bell. Dill raised his right hand. He held my mother's silver dinner bell. I'll go around the side of the house, Jem said. We were standing across the street yesterday and saw a panel was loose. I thought I could at least put it in the windowsill. Jem, now you're in this, you can't back out, you're in, Miss Priss. All right, but I don't want to watch. Jem, someone you'll watch the back and Dill will watch the front of the house and the road, and if anyone comes he'll ring the bell. Got it? All right then. What did you write to him? Dill said, we asked him very politely to come out sometime and tell us what he was doing in there. We said we wouldn't hurt him and we'd buy him an ice cream. You're all crazy, he'll kill us. Dill said, here's my idea. I thought if he came out and sat with us a while he might feel better. How do you know he won't feel better? Well, how would you feel if you were locked up for 100 years with nothing to eat but cats? I bet his whiskers were down here like your father's beard. My father didn't have a beard, Dill stopped, as if trying to remember. Pfft, that's a lie, I said. You said before you got off the bus your father had a black beard. If that's true, my father shaved it off this summer. Oh, yes, I've got a letter to prove it. He sent me $2 too. Go on, I bet he sent you a mounted police uniform too. And it never came, did it? You keep telling those stories, boy. Dill Harris could make up the biggest stories I ever heard. For instance, he'd been on a mail plane 17 times, he'd been to Nova Scotia, he'd seen an elephant, and his grandfather was Major General Joe Wheeler and left him his sword. You all be quiet, Jem said. He reached under the floorboards and pulled out a yellow bamboo pole. Is this long enough to stand in on the sidewalk? Anyone brave enough to walk into that house doesn't need a fishing rod, I said. Why don't you just come and knock on the front door? Something else, Jem said, how many times do I have to tell you that? Dill pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to Jem. The three of us walked cautiously toward the old house. Dill stopped at the lamppost at the front corner and Jem and I walked cautiously along the sidewalk parallel to the side. I passed Jem and stood where I could see the turn. Empty, I said. Nobody in sight. Jem looked up the sidewalk at Dill, who nodded. Jem tied the letter to the end of his fishing rod, thrust it across the yard, and pushed it toward the window he had chosen. The rod missed its destination by a few inches, and Jem leaned forward with all his might. I watched him make these jabbing motions for a long time, then I left my position and joined him. Can't get it off the rod, he muttered, and if I did get it off, I wouldn't get it in the right place. Get back to the street, Scout. I went back and looked up and down the deserted street. Occasionally I glanced at Jem, who was patiently trying to place the letter on the windowsill. It kept falling to the ground and Jem kept screwing it up, until I thought Boo Radley couldn't read it if he got it. I was looking along the street when the bell rang. I'll admit it, I lurched around, expecting to be confronted by Boo Radley and his terrible fangs. Instead I saw Dill standing in front of Atticus, shaking the bell vigorously. Jem looked so miserable I couldn't bear to tell him I told him so. He shuffled along, dragging the long fishing rod along the sidewalk. Atticus said, "Just shake that bell." Dill grabbed the bell's handle, and in the silence that followed, I wished it would ring again. Atticus pushed back his hat and stood with his hands on his hips. "Jem," he said, "what are you doing?" "Nothing, sir." "I don't want to hear that answer. Tell me." We were just trying to give something to Mr. Radley." "What were we trying to give him?" "Just a letter." "Let me see." Jem held out a dirty piece of paper. Atticus took it and tried to read it. "Why do we want Mr. Radley out?" Dill said, "We thought he'd like us," and stopped when Atticus looked at him. "Son," he said to Jem, "I'm going to tell you one thing and I'll only say it once. Okay, stop bothering him. That goes for both of you. What Mr. Radley did was his own business. If he wanted to go out, he would go out. If he wanted to stay in his house, he had a right to stay there, away from the attentions of curious children, which was a mild term for people like us. What would we think if Atticus barged in without knocking when we were in our rooms at night? We were, in fact, doing the same thing to Mr. Radley. What Mr. Radley did might seem odd to us, but it wasn't odd to him. Besides, had it never occurred to us that the polite way to communicate with people was through the front door instead of the window? Finally, we were to stay away from that house until invited in. We were to play none of the silly games he had seen us play, or tease anyone on this street or in this town. "We weren't teasing him, we ain't laughing at him," said Jem, "so that's what you're doing, is it? Teasing him?" "No," said Atticus, exposing his life history to the whole neighborhood. Jem looked a little puffed up. "I didn't say we were doing that, I didn't." Atticus chuckled. "I just told you," he said. "You stop this nonsense, all three of you." Jem gaped at him. "You want to be a lawyer, don't you?" My father's mouth tightened suspiciously, as if he were trying to keep it closed. Jem decided there was no use arguing about details, and was silent. When Atticus went into the house to find the file he had forgotten to take to work that morning, Jem realized he had been beaten by the oldest recorded legal trick. He waited at a reasonable distance from the steps, watching Atticus leave the house and head toward town. When Atticus was out of earshot, Jem shouted after him, "I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but now I'm not so sure." Chapter 6 "All right," my father said when Jem asked if we could go sit by Miss Rachel's fish pond with Dill, since this was his last night in Maycomb. "Say goodbye to him for me, we'll see him next summer." We jumped over the low wall that separated Miss Rachel's yard from our driveway. Jem whistled his partridge whistle and Dill answered in the darkness. "Not a breath of wind," Jem said. "Look over there." He pointed east. The huge moon rose behind Miss Maudie's hickory grove. "It makes it look hotter," he said. "Is that a cross on it tonight?" Dill asked, not looking up. He was making a cigarette out of a newspaper and a string. "No, just the moon." "Don't light it, Dill, you'll stink up this whole corner." There was a woman in the moon in Maycomb. She sat combing her hair before her vanity mirror. "We'll miss you, kid," I said. "Should we wait and see Mr. Avery?" Mr. Avery rented across the street from Mrs. Henry Lafayette Dubos's house. Besides making change in the collection plate every Sunday, Mr. Avery sat on the porch every night until 9 and sneezed. One night we were privileged to witness what seemed to be his last performance, for we had waited so long to see him do it again. One night as Jem and I were leaving Miss Rachel's porch, Dill stopped us and said, "Hey, look over there." It pointed across the street. At first we saw nothing but the grapevine that covered the front porch, but looking closely we saw a stream of water curling from the leaves, which we estimated to be about 10 feet above the ground, falling and splashing in the yellow circle of the street light. Jem said Mr. Avery had miscalculated. Dill said he drank about a gallon a day, and the ensuing contest to determine our relative distances and talents again left me feeling left out, since I had no talent in the subject. Dill stretched, yawned, and said matter-of-factly, "I know what I'm talking about, let's go for a walk." I heard him suspiciously. Nobody in Maycomb went for walks. "Where are you going, Dill?" Dill nodded toward the south. Jem said, "Okay." When I protested, he said sweetly, "You don't have to come along, Angel May. You don't have to." Remember, Jem was not one to dwell on past failures. The only message he seemed to get from Atticus was an understanding of the art of cross-examination. "Scout, we ain't gonna do nothing, just go to the streetlight and back. We walked along the sidewalk in silence, listening to the porch rocker creak under the weight of our neighbor, listening to the low murmurs of the adults in our neighborhood. Occasionally we heard Miss Stephanie Crawford laugh. "Why?" Dill said. "Okay," Jem said. "Why don't you go home, Scout?" Dill and Jem would simply peeking through the shuttered window to see if they could see Boo Radley, and if I didn't want to go with them, I could go straight home and keep my mouth shut, that's all. "But what the hell are you waiting for tonight?" Because no one would see them at night, because Atticus would be so wrapped up in a book he wouldn't hear the kingdom come, because if Boo Radley killed them they'd only miss the school year instead of the summer vacation, and because it's easier to see inside a house in the dark than in the daylight, do you understand? "Jem, please." "Scout, I'm telling you for the last time, shut up or go home. I tell you by God you're getting more like a girl." At that, I had no choice but to follow them. We thought it best to go under the high wire fence at the back of the Radley lot, where we'd have less chance of being seen. The fence surrounded a large garden and a small wooden toilet. Jem pulled up the lowest wire and Dill climbed through. I followed, raising the ditch for Jem. The gap was too small for Jem. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. "Whatever you do, don't go in the mustard patch, they wake the dead." With that in mind, it took me perhaps a minute to take a step. I moved faster when I saw Jem waving in the moonlight from far ahead. We reached the gate that separated the garden from the backyard. Jem touched it. The gate creaked. "Spit on it," Dill whispered. "You're getting us all in a tight spot, Jem," I muttered. "We can't get away from here easily." "SHH, spit on it, Scout." We spat until our mouths were dry, and Jem opened the gate slowly, lifted it aside, and leaned it against the fence. We were in the backyard. The back of the Radley place was less pleasant than the front. A crumbling porch ran the length of the house. There were 2 doors and 2 windows between the doors. Instead of a large pillar, there was only a square post supporting one end of the roof. 28 An old Franklin stove stood in the corner of the porch. Above it a hat rack mirror reflected the moonlight and glowed mysteriously. "Ah," Jem whispered, lifting his leg. "What is it?" "Chickens," he breathed. That we were obliged to avoid things unseen on all sides was confirmed when Dill led us in whispering the word "chua." We crept to the side of the house, around to the loose shutter. The sill was several feet higher than Jem. "Let me carry you up," Jem whispered to Dill. "Wait." Jem grabbed his left wrist and my right wrist, and I grabbed my left wrist and Jem's right wrist, and we squatted down and Dill sat on our litter. We lifted it up and it caught the window sill. "Hurry," Jem whispered, "we won't last long." Dill grabbed my shoulders and we lowered it to the ground. "What do you see?" "Nothing." "The curtains. There's a glimmer of light somewhere, anyway." "Get out of here," Jem whispered. "Let's go around back." "SHH." He warned me, when I started to protest. "Try looking out the back window." "Dill, no," I said. Dill stopped and let Jem go first. When Jem put his foot on the bottom step, it creaked. Jem stood still, testing his weight inch by inch. The steps were silent. Jem took 2 steps, put his foot on the porch, jumped, and staggered for a long time. He regained his balance and knelt. He crawled to the window, raised his head, and looked in. Then I saw a shadow. It was the shadow of a man in a hat. At first I thought it was a tree, but there was no wind, and trees never move. The back porch was full of moonlight, and the shadow, stiff and stiff, crossed the porch toward Jem. Dill saw the shadow behind me. He put his hands over his face. When the shadow passed Jem, Jem saw it too. He put his arms over his head and stood still. The shadow stopped a few feet from Jem. Its arms rose from its hips, then dropped, and stood still. Then it turned, walked past Jem, walked along the porch, and disappeared down the side of the house, returning the way it had come. Jem jumped off the porch and ran toward us. He jerked open the gate, pulled Dill and me through, and shooed us down 2 rows of mustard greens. Halfway across, I tripped and fell. As I stumbled, the roar of the shotgun echoed through the neighborhood. Dill and Jem were beside me, Jem gasping for breath, the fence by the schoolyard. "Hurry," Scout. Jem pulled up the wire, Dill and I ducked under, and when we were halfway to the lone oak tree in the middle of the schoolyard, we realized that Jem wasn't following us. We ran back and found him rolling around at the fence, having pulled off his pants to escape. He ran to the oak tree in his shorts. Safe behind the tree, we were stunned, but Jem's mind was working. We have to get home, people will notice we're missing. We ran across the schoolyard, crawled under the fence into the deer park behind our house, climbed over the back fence, and reached the back steps before Jem Lee made my way out into the front yard as casually as I could. We looked up the street and saw a group of neighbors gathered in front of the Radley gate. "Let's go there," Jem said. "They'll think it's strange if we don't show up." Mr. Nathan Radley was standing inside his gate, clutching his broken shotgun. Atticus stood next to Miss Maudie and Stephanie Crawford. Miss Rachel and Mr. Avery stood next to him. None of them saw us coming. We squeezed in next to Miss Maudie, who was looking around. "Where have you been? Haven't you heard all this commotion? What's going on?" Jem asked. "Mr. Radley shot a nigger in his vegetable garden." "Oh. Did he hit?" "No," Miss Stephanie said. "Shot into the air. Scared him green anyway. Said if anybody saw a nigger who was white around here, he was the one. Say he's got another barrel for the next noise he hears in the vegetable patch, and next time he won't aim high, whether it's a dog, a nigger, or Jem Finch." "What, miss?" Jem asked. Atticus asked, "Where are your trousers, son?" "Pants, Dad." "Pants?" It was hopeless. He wore only shorts in front of God and everybody. I sighed. "Ah, Mr. Finch?" In the glare of the street lamp, I could see Dill was plotting. His eyes were wide, his round face rounder. "What is it, Dill?" Atticus asked. "Ah, I got his trousers," he said vaguely. "Won his trousers? How?" Dill rubbed the back of his neck, then put his hand across his forehead. "We play strip poker over there by the fish pond," he said. Jem and I were relieved. The neighbors seemed pleased, they all stiffened. But what was strip poker? We didn't get a chance to find out. Miss Rachel screamed like the town fire alarm, "Oh my goodness, Dill Harris! Playing poker right there in my fish pond? I'll strip poker you, boy!" Atticus saved Dill from instant dismemberment. "Wait a minute, Miss Rachel," he said. "I never heard of them playing that before. Are they all playing cards?" Jem caught the ball Dill passed with his eyes closed. "No, sir, just with matches." I admired my brother. Matches were dangerous, but cards were a curse. "Jem, Scout," Atticus said, "I don't want to hear about gambling in any form, do you hear? Go with Dill and get your pants back, Jem. You handle it." "Don't worry, Dill," Jem said, as we walked down the sidewalk, "she won't punish you. Father will talk her out of it." "That's quick thinking, old man." "Hush, do you hear?" We stopped, and heard Atticus's voice. "It's not serious, they all go through it." Miss Rachel Dill was relieved, but Jem and I were not. It was a matter of Jem laying out some pants in the morning. "Let me give you my pants," Dill said, when we reached Miss Rachel's steps. Jem said they didn't fit him, but thanked him anyway. We said goodbye, and Dill went into the house. He evidently remembered he was engaged to me, for he came back out and kissed me quickly in front of Jem. "Write a letter, will you?" It screamed behind us. If Jem's pants had been safely on Jem, we wouldn't have gotten much sleep. Every night sound I heard from my bed on the back porch was magnified threefold. Every footstep on gravel was Boo Radley seeking revenge. Every Negro who passed laughing and talking in the night was Boo Radley prowling after us. The insects that rushed against the screen door were Boo Radley's mad fingers tearing wire to pieces. The Chinese rosewood trees were vicious, flickering, alive. I drifted between sleep and wakefulness until I heard Jem mumble. "Sleep yet, little Three Eyes? Are you crazy?" SHH Atticus's lights out. In the waning moonlight I saw Jem kick his foot to the ground. "I'll go get it," he said. I sat up. "No, I won't let you go." He pulled on his shirt. "I've got to get it back. If you go I'll wake Atticus. If you do I'll kill you." I pulled him down beside me on the bed. I tried to convince him. Mr. Nathan will find it tomorrow morning, Jem. He knows you lost it. When he gives it to Atticus it'll be pretty bad, but that's all. Go to bed. I know that too, Jem said. That's why I'm going to get it. I was beginning to feel uneasy. He went back there alone. I remembered Miss Stephanie saying, Mr. Nathan had another barrel for the next noise he heard, whether it was the dog, the nigger. Jem knew that better than I. I said desperately, look, it's not worth it, Jem. One hit hurts but it doesn't last long. You'll get your head blown off, Jem. Please, he breathed patiently. It's like this, Scout, he muttered. Atticus hasn't spanked me in my whole life. I want to keep that. Here was an idea. It seemed like Atticus was threatening us every day. I mean, Atticus hasn't caught me doing anything. Maybe so, but I just want to keep it that way. Oh, Scout. We shouldn't have done that tonight, Scout. By then, I think Jem and I were starting to have a falling out. Sometimes I didn't understand him, but my periods of confusion were brief. This was beyond me. Please, I begged, can't you just think about it for a minute, alone there? Shut up. It's not like Dad never talks to you again or something. I'll wake him up, Jem, I swear Jem grabbed the collar of my pajamas and twisted. Then I'll go with you, I choked. No, you can't go. You'll just make a noise. It was no use. I unlatched the back door and held it while he crawled down the steps. It must have been 2 o'clock. The moon was going down and the chain-link fences were fading. Jem's white shirt bobbed like a little ghost skipping away from the coming morning. A breeze blew, chilling the sweat running down the sides of my face. He'd gone the back way, through the deer park, across the schoolyard and around to the fence, I think, at least that was the route he was taking. That would take more hours, so it wasn't time to worry. I waited until I did worry and heard Mr. Radley's gun. Then I thought I heard the back fence creak. It was wishful thinking. Then I heard Atticus cough. I held my breath. Sometimes we'd come to the bathroom in the middle of the night to find him reading. Dad said he used to wake up in the middle of the night, check on us, then read again to go to sleep. I waited for Dad's light to come on, straining to see the light filling the room. It was still off, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The worms had gone to rest, but the ripe peaches still tapped on the roof when the wind blew, and the darkness was mournful with the distant barking of dogs. There he was, coming back to me. His white shirt flickered against the back fence and grew clearer. He walked up the back steps, bolted the door behind him, and sat down on his bed. Without a word, he lifted his trousers. He lay down, and for a moment I heard his bed shake. Then he lay still, and I heard him move no more.